Yeah, we know there's a problem with society, Russell. We know we can't trust the media, the government, big business, but what are we going to do about it? What's your vision for a new world? Instead of prattling on and talking the whole time, give us some suggestions and ideas for an alternative way of living together. Why don't you actually just use some of these great people that you talk to on your brilliant podcast, Under the Skin, on Luminary, that you can subscribe to now, link in the description, to corral together a set of ideas and principles that people can live with? Why don't you talk to Jordan Peterson, Vandana Shiva, Jaques Perretti, JoelBakan, some of the best thinkers of our time, to understand new ways of organising. You've understood now that this is a rhetorical device. That is what I'm going to do. This is a set of videos about my conversations with brilliant contemporary thinkers about how we can organise society differently, ranging from Jordan Peterson all the way to Brene Brown, all talking about one thing. As individuals, as a society, as a culture, can we live better? Can we live differently? Is utopia possible? Is it possible for you as an individual and as a member of a collective and a society to live freely without the intervention of state and corporations, without constantly being bombarded with fake media messaging? Let's get into it. First of all, this conversation I had with Jordan Peterson, fantastic chat on Under the Skin. We talked about the future, potential, hope. First of all, let's establish, is there something we can do, or are we all doomed? Is it too late already? Over to you, Jordan Peterson.
If you look at the data, Marian Tupy has written a beautiful coffee table book showing this. It's 10 trends that every educated person should be aware of, and then a bunch of micro trends. If you look at major economic trends globally, so many things are getting better so quickly, although still incrementally, that it's really, it's unparalleled in human history, and it's accelerating. But it isn't obvious how to make that romantic. And so it's a problem with storytelling to some degree. It's like, well, what do you say to young, if Black Lives Matter or Antifa or right-wing groups that have a conspiratorial element call to a romantic element in young people, they offer them an adventure, and that's really important. But an adventure, the adventure of incremental rational progress, isn't an adventure, right? It's almost the opposite of that. It's slow and incremental and diffuse, and it's hard to make that into an adventure. And so the communitarian element is, it's not easy to transform into a motivating message. And I mean, I was trying to do that to some degree in Beyond Order.
While Jordan Peterson has a little think, let me say I agree with some of the things he said there, but I think building a new society is an adventure, and I think it requires that romantic energy. You need only see the power generated by sporting tournaments to recognise that pragmatic, practical, real events can elicit deep human powers. Now, another thing that Jordan did is cited a set of groups that are somewhat oppositional in their beliefs, like Black Lives Matter, people from the right, etc. Now, what I feel that's demonstrated there is the need for a central myth, but localized community. There are some people that have as their priority principles around equality racially. There are some people who have the forefront a kind of expression of religiosity. Now, neither of those groups is wrong. Both of those ideas are important. Need those ideas continually be practiced in an integrated way by all groups at all times? No, that's homogenization. Globalization requires that we flatten out our differences. Tribalism and distinction and differences needn't be a negative thing unless they're escalated to the point of conflict. Who cares what's going on in someone else's mind or someone else's community if it isn't impacting you or your community? Can we not allow, as once was the norm, for across the globe different tribes to be living differently until the great monolithic colonizing cultures unrooted, uprooted, unbolted from the kind of tender principles of personal sovereignty, outreaching into further and further deeper dominance, brought all of this stuff into a sort of a globalized mess. That's not the perfect sentence to express that, but what I'm saying is that tribalism, as long as people aren't fighting for the same resources, whether that's intellectual or physical resources, isn't a problem.
Because look, there's nothing that's not within our grasp now, Russell, as a species. We can do whatever we want. Now we have to figure out what we should do. And then we have to figure out how to communicate that in a way that's motivating to everyone, so everyone's on board. That's the problem that faces us.
So Jordan Peterson conveys the hope, the possibility for change, that the energy exists, is often misdirected, but it's there, it's present. What cultural and systemic filters are in place to prevent our ideals and the energy that drives us toward the pursuit of these ideals from ever being realised? I spoke to investigative reporter and author Jaques Perretti about the challenges we face in a society that reveres and sacralises consumerism over community and personal authority.
When we move to online shopping, what's that going to do to the cathedrals of consumerism? You know, the shopping centres, these places where we go to worship the god of shopping. Because in a sense, that replacement of God with shopping has been with us for half a century. It's kind of what we know.
Jordan Peterson acknowledged that there is a kind of mobilising energy within us that often gets diverted by political causes, but perhaps more importantly, as Jaques Perretti explains, by our ubiquitous ideology of consumerism, which is fundamentally a religion, that this is the means that we used to medicate and metabolise our emotional experiences here. I feel it myself quite a lot, that when I feel love for my children, I want to buy them something. When I feel grief in myself, I want to buy something. When I feel happy and joyous, I want to buy something, because I've been indoctrinated my entire life to be an operative within this system, primarily a consumer. People that talk about secularism as if it's a solution to the problems of kind of medieval religion or sort of simplistic monotheistic systems of organisation forget that there are certain impulses within us that need to be structured, that need a format. Otherwise, we yield to financial and economic ideologies that occupy that space by default.
Not only profound in terms of how the economy operates, it's also profound in terms of what it does neurologically to us. You know, we talk glibly about shopping addiction, retail therapy and so on. But those feelings, that endorphin rush, you know, that release of happiness that has to be replicated, that addiction, and you know about this stuff, you know, that addiction to that feeling has to be replicated faster and faster and more often and more often. The shopping is at the heart of who we are, how we define ourselves in relation to our neighbours and our friends. It's absolutely everything. It's the heart of capitalism.
So we're not without an ideology. It's not just groups that are on the extreme ends of the pendulum that are mobilising this radical, powerful energy within us. It's the central ideology that does the most damage, that benefits most from these romantic energies. Yuval Noah Harari, the author and historian whose book Sapiens changed the discourse in many ways around tribalism, language, it was a profoundly influential piece of work, talks about Mahatma Gandhi and Gandhi's idea that India oughtn't, when independence was won from the colonising British, replicate the systems of governance that the British had put in place, but embrace a kind of localised anarchism. Yuval Noah Harari is critical of those ideas.
And Gandhi failed in this respect. I mean, Gandhi had a vision of turning India into this collection of agrarian, autarkic utopias. And the only thing left of Gandhi's vision in the current Indian economy is his image on these rupee notes. That's the only thing left.
Yeah.
And this is partly because, you know, Gandhi's analysis was inappropriate for the 20th century. You couldn't, I mean, it's a very nice vision to have India as a collection of agrarian utopias. It's just irrelevant to how the economy functions in the late 20th century.
But the way that an economy functions in the late 20th century is not like an organic event like the climate. It is a constructed ideology. Economies are ideologies. There are all sorts of ways of organising economies and therefore societies. So from Jordan Peterson's initial observation that there's an energy within us, to Jaques Perretti's idea that consumerism and the cathedrals of commerce that occupy significant spaces in our life, architecturally, psychologically, harness, mobilise and attract that energy, all the way to Yuval Noah Harari's cynical view of Gandhi's utopian idea that localised communities could create a different way of living, an alternative way of living to centralised, broadly authoritarian, apparently democratic societies, for me leads us to an interesting point. JoelBakan, professor of law and writer of the book The Corporation, believes that if we are unable to express meaningful power through tribes and communities, a kind of shadow version of tribalism presents, a culture of fragmentation, oppositionism and conflict.
What globalism has done in the form it's taken in advanced capitalism is to undermine people's ability to create those communities in their own communities. In other words, the economic infrastructure that they need is taken away as companies take jobs elsewhere. The security that they have of a good healthcare and education system is taken away as corporations succeed in destroying social infrastructures. So you've got this weird combination where on the one hand, we're supposed to be a global community, we're supposed to care what's happening in Finland, and at the same time, nobody cares about us in our own community. And I think that leads to the kind of horrible angst and xenophobia and racism that we're seeing today. I think that if you completely gut the social infrastructure of people's lives, if you completely gut the very idea that there should be a social infrastructure through neoliberal ideas, you start to force people more into a desperate tribalism, desperate in the sense that they feel their lives have no hope, that they feel that in the name of some kind of global ideal, their own communities, their own families, their own lives are being destroyed.
So there is an impulse in us that wants to change the world. There is an ideology that's replacing the kind of ideals that people organically feel to create communities, to have personal independence and personal authority. Yuval Noah Harari explains adeptly that we need to have ideals and systems that are appropriate to the time that we live in. And Gandhi's ideals perhaps were somewhat at odds with the century he lived in, but with the technology we have for today, with the means of communication that we have today, new possibilities automatically exist. And JoelBakan helps us to understand that tribalized societies can work if you have proper autonomy. So there are alternative ways of organizing society. We can skip like a stone across these various academic perspectives and already see the outline of an alternative. Brene Brown, beloved of the world, doctor of philosophy, adds that the significance of spirituality when organizing societies cannot be underestimated.
Can any system thrive and work when it's devoid of spirituality, when systems only exist to serve people who are inherently spiritual beings?
I spoke to Brene Brown about the resignation of the then Prime Minister Theresa May and how her public display of emotion at losing her job was an indication of kind of depths that had always been concealed when she was operating as a politician, and how that kind of shows that there is a disjunct between the way we run the world and the way we actually are.
No, we totally objectify. It is, and it's dehumanization, which I think is the most dangerous thing we're facing right now, is rampant dehumanization. Yeah. Which, you know, dehumanization starts with language and has been at the forefront of every genocide in history. Yes. You know, and we see that now. We see it with the way Trump talks about immigrants, those animals.
Brene Brown's belief that spirituality ought to be a fundamental organising principle for any system of government, whether that's a small system of a few hundred people or your own life and your own family, is followed up beautifully by Dr. Vandana Shiva, the philosopher, who explains that our loss of connection to the sacred is responsible for much of the deterioration of not only our social values, but for the kind of economic problems and our inability to collectively mobilise against centralising forces of corporatism or centralised government agencies that increasingly diminish the power of indigenous communities or, you know, any ordinary folk.
The first very important gift of the Vedas is to recognize that the universe is divine. The smallest grass, the tiniest rivulet is an expression of the divine. And that's why it's not an accident. You know, we hold our rivers as sacred, except that now with industrialism and urbanization, we are polluting them. Our trees, our tulsi, the seeds. And can you imagine, this is so touching to me. When I go to the villages, women will do sacred ceremonies with indigenous seed. They will never use a hybrid seed for a sacred ceremony. For sacred ceremony with animals, they will only use the indigenous cows with the hum. They will never use a Jersey cow. It's quite amazing. No one told them, but they have that understanding of integrity. And what does sacred means? It means to treat without violation, to hold the integrity.
So there you are then, a little journey through some of the people I've met on Under the Skin, my podcast with Luminary. In this particular case, to illustrate the idea that there are alternative ways of organising society. Obviously, this video is not an in-depth essay on how to create new communities, but across those videos with very experienced and brilliant speakers, we discovered that there is a sacred power within us, and if that sacredness is expressed in the way we organise systems, we will create genuine alternatives to the materialistic ideologies that currently govern us by default. If you enjoyed that video, please press like, please subscribe to it. Let us know what you thought in the comments below, and let me know what other ideas you'd like to see explored and discussed. If you can bear to, stick the notification bell on and sign up at russellbrand.com to my mailing list, and I'll let you know what live work I'm doing, about shows that I'm streaming, all sorts of stuff is available to you on there. If you want to listen to those podcasts in full, go over to Luminary, which you can listen to on Apple, or you can subscribe to at luminary.com. Thank you very much for watching.